The Deadly Little Mermaid, also known as Deadly Mermaid. And this, of course, is a mockbuster coming out from the UK. And we've seen plenty of these based on, you know, public domain properties and things like this, but kind of to try and take advantage of the Disney releases and stuff like that. So anyway, what's this one all about then? Well, it's kind of like The Only Way is Essex meets Sirens, I guess you want to say. You probably might not know what Only Way of Essex is, but if you're in the UK, you might. So it's a British film, and there's a coastal town, and we have this guy who has lost, like, his daughter at sea somehow, and one day he happened to cross this woman, you know, on the kind of the coast, and she seems disoriented, so he takes her in. But of course, she might actually be a mermaid. Along the same time, there is a variety of killings at the kind of the seafront, and we see that they are in fact the work of mermaids, killer mermaids, if you will. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. Now, this is a very, very low budget movie. I am kind of familiar with how these kind of movies are made in regards to kind of time frames and budgets and stuff like this. It is a very, very cheap movie. Positives? Now, this one stood out to me for its use of its soundtrack, first and foremost. Because if you know anything about the Sirens, which is kind of similar to mermaids, is that they kind of use song to lure men into kind of trances and things to kind of get them to jump into the sea and you know, ultimately kill themselves. And this movie almost has this somewhat consistent sort of melody that kind of plays, this kind of song from these merfolk, I guess you want to say. And you know, I've got to say, it's kind of like almost like a bit like a sea shanty in a way. I feel it's quite good. And then they weirdly have these, like, when there's an attack, it changes into sort of like thrash metal. So I don't necessarily know if it's good in regards to its soundtrack, but I think it's certainly, the soundtrack is used to its full effect. I actually quite like the kind of the weird sort of siren sound. It's a bit overplayed, admittedly, but the weird sort of transition into sort of thrash metal was interesting and certainly memorable. So yeah, I would say it's a aggressive use of music that makes it kind of stand out at the very least, even if you're maybe not a fan of thrash metal or whatever. But it'll kind of you'll remember it because it's so in your face. So that was you know, that was interesting and sort of stood out to me. There is actually a couple of reasonable effects here. There's a guy that sort of, let's say, loses his head. But I thought, oh, do you know what? That was actually fairly well done. So there's one or two sort of effects here that I think are okay. Now the mermaid, they've used a mix of kind of AI and sort of practical effects, and you know, both are on the cheaper side. I think it's clearly like grok has been used, and you know, one of these kind of mersuits that you just put your legs in and stuff. But we are talking about a low budget B movie. I mean, it's probably what you expect for this kind of thing. And the movie, it does try and play a little bit like a romantic thriller. I suspect this one, I feel this one is maybe made for more of a female audience, I have to say. Because it just has this sort of, it tries to have this romantic fantasy element to it. And, you know, you've got all the guys with their sort of muscle shirts on and all the rest of it, and it feels like it's made more for the female gaze, shall we say, than anything else. So if you're a lady, you know, you may want to check it out if you like your romantic fantasies and all of that, your airports, you know, horny mum novels, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Exactly what I'm talking about. But that sort of thing, it reminds me of that in a way. And Acting-wise, do you know what? It's a mixed bag. These movies often are, but there's one or two roles that I think are okay. In actual fact, there's a couple of smaller roles here that actually stood out to me as actually being, you know, fair. There's a couple of like random people that we kind of meet, and I actually didn't think their acting was all that bad. But you know, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. So let's talk about what doesn't work. It's a little bit of a mixed bag in regards to the acting. So to me, this movie has this sort of element where the actors feel like they're maybe trying a little too hard at times. You know, this movie, because it's a very slow movie, and it is a slow movie, we'll come on to that, but a lot is required of the actors because it's not a lot of in-your-face stuff happening. And some of these kind of tender moments come across as a little bit sort of, you know, trying a bit too hard and false, to be honest with you, because we're meant to have these sort of very emotive scenes, and it doesn't quite pull that off, I will say. The movie has this weird... The way it's cut is quite strange, because we have this quite a slight story where this guy finds this, you know, mermaid and sort of brings her home, and that's played out pretty slowly. You know, it's if you've seen the 80s movie The Splash with Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks, it's sort of I guess a little bit like that in a way, but very, very low budget and played more horror. But it's kind of like it's punctuated with these like random attacks, and they could have been incorporated into the story more. It just feels like the movie has this kind of very slow meandering plot about this kind of like this couple, interspliced with like scenes of these attacks, and this, you know, thrash music, and it just feels super jarring, to be honest. I mean, I think, you know, the scenes are low budget and stuff, but you know, maybe they could have just been incorporated into the actual movie better. Because I just feel like it doesn't really flow as a sort of as a story, really. It just seems like a bunch of stuff, and then other scenes that have probably been shot later added in, like kind of reshoots and stuff like that, and it sort of feels jarring. The main story is incredibly slow. It's ultimately not a very interesting movie. It's kind of dull. There's not much going on, I have to say. That the main story is kind of boring, to be brutally honest, and these kind of attacks, little kind of gore shots and things like that, I think could have been incorporated into the story a lot better, to be honest. But the soundtrack stands out. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.
I have the power to make you subscribe to Geek Legion of Doom.